Grandma's spoiled grandchildren in just weeks of taking care of them. The silence in the mansion was not merely an absence of sound, it was a presence. It lived in the cavernous hallways lined with contemporary African art, slid across the cold, polished tanzanite marble floors, and perched like a watchful, melancholic spirit on the gilded edges of the cathedral high ceilings. It was a silence that had been purchased, room by room, with staggering success, and yet it was the one thing all the billions in the Aliyu fortune could not sell away. Madame Funk Aliyu, the architect of this empire, sat in her favorite wingback chair in the sunroom. The afternoon Lagos sun, fierce and golden, streamed through the bulletproof glass, illuminating a universe of dancing dust motes. It caught the elegant silver streaks in her hair, styled to perfection, and glinted off the simple but profound diamond solitaire on her finger, her one concession to sentimental jewelry, a token from him. From Bayo. 8 years. 2,920 days of this crushing quiet. Her gaze drifted from the manicured gardens, where a team of 3 landscapers worked noiselessly, to the sprawling cityscape of Victoria Island below. Her name was on those buildings, the Aliyu Tower, the Funk Plaza. She had built this dynasty from a single container of imported textiles, her sharp mind and fiercer while forging a conglomerate that spanned oil and gas, real estate, and telecommunications. Bayo had been her rock, her cheerleader, the warm heart to her strategic mind. Together, they had been a force. Now, she was a monument. A soft knock pierced the stillness. "Madam," came the voice of Ibrahim, her major domo of 30 years. "Your tea." "Come in, Ibrahim," she said, her voice still carrying the clear, authoritative tone that could make executives twice her size falter. He entered, a picture of dignified efficiency, placing a sterling silver tray with a bone china pot and a single cup before her. The ritual was a relic of a shared life. Bayo had loved his afternoon tea, a habit from his years in London. She had taken it up after he passed, a daily act of communion with his memory. "Will there be anything else, madam?" She looked at the second and used cup on the tray. It was always there, a silent, aching hope for a guest who never came. Her eyes, the same sharp brown that missed no detail in a financial report, now clouded with a loneliness so deep it felt like a physical hollow in her chest. "Has Tun called?" she asked, though she knew the answer. Ibrahim would have announced it immediately. "Not yet, Ma. Today is Saturday. He will call." A sigh, so faint it was almost inaudible, escaped her. Saturday, the highlight of her week. The one phone call that gave the preceding 6 days of silent opulence any meaning. Her son, Tund, her brilliant, handsome boy, the heir to it all. He was successful in his own right, running the finance arm of the company with an acuity that made her proud. But his success was a scaffold built against the towering edifice of her wealth. The penthouse in Ikoyi, the fleet of cars, the respect he commanded, it all traced its roots back to her, to the empire she and Bayo built. And while she gloried in his achievements, they were not what her soul craved. She wanted the noise. The messy, beautiful, chaotic noise of life. "Ibrahim," she said suddenly, as the silence pressed in again. "Do you remember when Tund was small? When he would run through this very room with his toy cars, making those terrible vroom vroom sounds?" A ghost of a smile touched Ibrahim's lips. "Yes, madam. He would always crash them into the leg of that table. Master Bayo would pretend to be a traffic warden. And the silence afterwards, it was a grateful silence. A peaceful silence." She looked around the pristine, immaculate room. This is a waiting silence." Ibrahim, who had seen the evolution of her joy and her grief, simply bowed his head. "The house waits with you, madam." After he left, she sat, the tea growing cold. Her mind replayed the memories like a sacred film reel. Bayo's booming laugh filling the sterile space. Tun's tiny feet pattering down the hall. The echoes of those sounds were now just phantoms, haunting her. Her phone, a sleek, discreet device, finally rang. The caller ID flashed, "Okomi, my husband." She had never changed Bayo's contact name. Her heart, for a foolish second, leapt. Then reality settled. It was Saturday. It was Tund, using his father's old phone, a tradition that had started as a comfort and had simply persisted. She swiped to answer, bringing the device to her ear with a hand that trembled slightly. "Tund. Mama." His voice, so like his father's in its timbre, was a balm. "How are you today?" How is the house? The house is the house, she said, unable to keep the weariness from her voice. It is too big for one person, Tund. It echoes. How are you? How is Kayamika? They exchanged pleasantries, but her mind was racing ahead to the only question that mattered. She could hear the gentle cadence of her daughter-in-law's voice in the background, and a pang, sharp and green, shot through her. That shared life, that partnership, it was what she missed most. Finally, she could wait no longer. She took a fortifying breath, the question that was her weekly mantra poised on her lips. Tund, Okomi, any news for me? Any developments? There was a pause on the line, a hesitation she knew too well. It was the pause before a gentle letdown. Mama, please. We are trying. You know these things are in God's hands. We are happy. We are blessed. Blessed, yes, she countered, the emotion thickening her voice. But a blessing can grow. My hands are empty, Tund. This house is a museum. I have built an empire for a kingdom without princes and princesses. I need to hear little feet. I need to hear laughter that isn't just an echo of my own. Your father and I, we dreamed of this house being full of generations. Her voice broke on the last word. In the boardroom, she was unshakable. Here, with her son, she was just a mother, a widow, yearning for the one thing her money was powerless to conjure. Mama, don't cry, Tund pleaded, his own voice strained. We hear you. We do. God will answer. I promise. The conversation ended with her usual admonitions for him to take care of his wife, to be a good husband, and his promises to visit soon. When the line went dead, the silence rushed back in, louder and more profound than before. It seemed to mock her, this vast, expensive quiet. She rose and walked to the grand window, placing her palm against the cool glass. Below, the city teemed with life. Millions of stories, families, and chaos. Up here, in her billionaire's eyrie, she was the queen of a silent, gilded cage. Her throne was a wingback chair. Her crown was the weight of unimaginable wealth. Her kingdom was an echoing mansion where the only subject was a profound, unyielding loneliness. A single, hot tear traced a path through her perfectly applied powder, a crack in the formidable facade of Madame Foncalieu. It was not the money she longed to leave behind. It was a legacy of love, of noise, of continuity. And as the sun began its descent, painting the sky in hues of fire and grief, she whispered into the swallowing quiet, a prayer and a plea to the memory of her husband and the ear of God. Bayo, send me grandchildren. Let my heart hear something other than this silence. A mother's campaign. Madame Funk's loneliness did not recede with the setting sun. It merely changed its texture. In the evenings, it became a sharper, more reflective ache. She would wander the mansion's west wing, now a meticulously preserved shrine to family life. Here, the silence was curated, intentional, a museum of memories she both cherished and feared. She would pause before the glass display case holding Tund's childhood treasures, a faded thread-bound copy of Things Fall Apart he'd read at 12. A collection of lead toy soldiers with chipped paint from long-forgotten battles on this very floor, the first calculator he'd used to best her in a mock business negotiation at 15. Her fingers would hover near the glass, as if she could touch the echoes of the boy who had filled these halls with explosive energy. Further down the corridor was Bayo's study, left exactly as it was the day he passed, a leather-bound ledger open on the desk. A pair of reading glasses perched atop it, a faint lingering scent of his sandalwood cologne and old paper. This was the heart of her loneliness, a place where the past was so tangible it hurt to breathe. But Madame Funk was not a woman to be defeated by grief. She had conquered markets, outmaneuvered rivals, and built an empire from grit and vision. Her sorrow, therefore, did not manifest as passive weeping. It transformed into a campaign, a strategic, relentless, and deeply emotional campaign for the future of the Aliyu line. Her son, Tund, became her primary focus, her most important client, the subject of her most delicate negotiations. Every interaction was a step in her campaign. Her first tactic was nostalgia. She began hosting monthly family dinners at the mansion, summoning Tund and, of course, Kayamika, whom she genuinely liked. The meals were extravagant, prepared by her private chef, but the true feast was the stories. Over bowls of spicy ifo riro and pounded yam, Madame Funk would expertly steer the conversation. Do you remember, Tund? She would begin, her eyes softening. When you were 7 and decided you would start your own business selling cashew nuts from the garden? You set up a little table by the gate and charged the security guards. Tund would laugh, a rich, warm sound that fed her soul. I was a terrible entrepreneur. I ate most of the inventory. You had your father's heart, though, she'd say, reaching to pat Kayamika's hand. He gave you the capital, a whole 200 naira, and bought your entire first batch. He said every empire starts with a single sale. She'd let the memory hang in the air, her gaze shifting between them. He would sit right there, she'd point to the head of the table, now poignantly empty, and talk about how he couldn't wait for little ones to sit around this table to tell them stories of their father, the cashew magnate. The subtext was as clear as crystal. This table is too big. These stories need new ears. Her second tactic was infrastructural investment. She began what Tund privately called the grandbaby siege. If they were building a family, she would supply the foundation. Deliveries began arriving at their Ikoyi penthouse with startling regularity. A state-of-the-art, Swiss-made crib, crafted from sustainable birchwood. A shipment of impossibly soft organic cotton onesies from Paris. A gleaming, top-of-the-line pram that looked like it could navigate the moon. One day, an entire pallet of premium diapers was delivered, enough for a small orphanage. Tund called her after the diaper delivery, exasperated. "Mama, please. We don't even have a baby yet. It's pressure." "Nonsense, Okomi," she replied, her voice a blend of innocence and steel. "It is simply being prepared. Faith without works is dead, isn't that what they say? I am just doing the works. The faith is up to you and your lovely wife." Her third, and most potent, tactic was the direct, heartfelt assault. The Saturday calls became more than check-ins. They were the weekly status meeting of her heart's most urgent project. "Mama, we are fine. Kayamika sends her love," Tund would say, trying to preempt her. "And I send mine to her. How is her work? Is she resting? She works too hard, you know. The body needs peace to welcome life. She couldn't help herself. Have you considered a holiday? A quiet place by the sea? I can book everything. Kayamika has a major project deadline, Mama. And so do I. Projects. What is a project compared to the project of life?" She'd sigh, the frustration seeping through. "Tund, when I look at your father's picture, I feel I am failing him. His name, our name, it needs to echo in the future. I am not getting younger. This silence, it is a weight." Her words, laced with such genuine pain, were a guilt Tund bore with loving difficulty. He understood her loneliness was a cavern, and she saw a grandchild as the only rope long enough to pull her out. Kayamika, graceful and perceptive, understood the pressure but also saw the wounded woman behind the campaign. She would gently counsel Tund. "She's not trying to be difficult, darling. She's grieving in her own way. Her entire life was building something for the future. Now she needs to see that future take shape." The campaign reached its peak during the anniversary of Bayo's passing. Madame Funk took Tund to the private family plot in the lush Ikoyi cemetery. Standing before the elegant granite headstone, she didn't cry. Instead, she spoke with a fierce, low urgency. "Your father and I, we planted a tree. A great, mighty Irako. That tree is our company, our wealth. But a tree is only as strong as its roots that go deep, and its seeds that are carried on the wind. You, Tund, are our deepest root. But where are our seeds?" She turned to him, her eyes blazing with unshed tears and profound longing. "Give me a reason to look forward, my son. Give your father's memory a living monument. Give me a grandchild." It was this final, raw plea, there amid the silence of the dead, that truly moved Tund. He saw not the billionaire, but his mother, a widow clutching at the promise of tomorrow. He held her, feeling the slightness of her frame beneath her elegant couture. "Okay, Mama," he whispered into her silver-streaked hair, his own eyes damp. "We hear you. We really do." The campaign, a relentless blend of strategy, nostalgia, and raw emotion, had finally breached the walls of his cautious planning. He drove home that night, the ghost of his father's smile and the palpable weight of his mother's hope sitting in the passenger seat beside him. He looked at Kayamika, sleeping peacefully as they returned from the cemetery visit, and made a silent vow. It was time. The siege was over. The foundation had been laid. Now, they would build. The hopeful siege. The surrender after the cemetery visit was not an end, but a transfiguration. The campaign morphed, in Madame Funk's mind, into a state of joyful preparedness. The pressure eased from a pointed demand into a thrumming, ubiquitous anticipation. She was no longer a general laying siege to an empty fortress. She was a master architect, gleefully drafting blueprints for a palace she was certain was soon to be commissioned. Her first act was to scale back the direct appeals. The Saturday calls, while never missing, softened. "How are you, Okomi?" she would ask, her voice warm. "Is Kayamika well? Is she eating properly? The weather is changing. She must not catch a chill." The questions were maternal, cloaked in general care, but the subtext was a gentle, persistent hum. The space where any news once hung was now a palpable, waiting silence on the line, a silence Tund felt compelled to fill with assurances about their health and happiness. The real action, however, shifted to the material world. The deliveries to the Ikoyi penthouse, which had paused briefly after Tund's diaper-related protest, resumed with a new, more sophisticated character. It became the hopeful siege. The items were no longer just functional. They were talismans, hopeful incantations made manifest. A hand-carved mobile from Ghana, its delicate wooden bird suspended as if in mid-flight, arrived in a crate filled with fragrant cedar shavings. A collection of classic children's books, The Lion and the Jewel, Ache, beautifully illustrated editions of folk tales, appeared on their doorstep, each inscribed in Madame Funk's elegant script for future story times. "Love, Grandma." One Tuesday, a colossal, impossibly plush, cream-colored teddy bear arrived. It was nearly 4 feet tall and sat serenely in the hallway, a benign behemoth with kind, glass-bead eyes. Kayamika, finding it after work, had burst into laughter so hard she cried. "It looks like it runs a boardroom," she wheezed, taking a picture to send to Tund. The bear, christened chairman by the couple, took up a permanent, watchful position in the would-be nursery, a silent, fuzzy sentinel of hope. Madame Funk also began subtly reshaping her own world. On a visit to the mansion, Kayamika noticed something different in the vast sunroom. The severe, modern art on one wall had been replaced by a vibrant, sweeping triptych from a renowned Nigerian painter, depicting children playing in a bustling village market, all bright colors and joyful chaos. In a corner, where a sterile sculptural piece once stood, was a beautiful, old-fashioned rocking horse, its leather saddle worn soft from a previous generation of Aliyu children, Tund's own. "Don't mind the old things," Madame Funk said casually, noticing Kayamika's gaze. "I'm just redecorating. A house needs to feel alive, don't you think?" The most poignant part of the siege was the room. Madame Funk had designated a suite of rooms in the East Wing as the future grandchildren's quarters. She took to spending afternoons there, not in frantic planning, but in quiet contemplation. She would test the sunlight at different hours, imagining where a crib might catch the morning light. She had Ibrahim source the most hypoallergenic, softest carpets. She debated color schemes aloud with her decorator. Not too gendered, something joyful but calming. It was a shrine to a future faith. In her visits there were her prayers. Tund and Kayamika, meanwhile, existed in a state of amused, tender besiegement. The constant arrival of hopeful parcels became a running joke. "The supply drop has arrived," Tund would announce, carrying in a box containing an exquisite, miniature traditional Igbada and Buba set. They felt enveloped not by pressure, but by a formidable, loving expectation. It was as if Madame Funk's will was so powerful it was creating a gravitational pull, drawing a new life towards them. The emotional tide truly turned one evening at the mansion. After another of her lavish dinners, Madame Funk did not tell a story from the past. Instead, she led them to Bayo's study. She didn't go in, but stood at the threshold. "Your father," she said softly, her hand on the doorframe. "His greatest pride wasn't the tower with his name, you know. It was the scholarship fund for the village children." He said, "Funk, we are building legacies of stone and steel, but the only legacy that breathes is the one made of flesh and mind." She turned to them, her eyes luminous with unshed tears. "I have all the stone and steel one could dream of. What I am waiting for, what I am hoping for with every piece of my heart, is the legacy that breathes." She wasn't looking at Tund alone. Her gaze rested on Kayamika, inclusive, pleading, full of a love that was desperate to be given. "I just want to have a hand, however small, in nurturing something that breathes. In the car home that night, the usual light banter was absent. Kayamika stared out at the glittering city, her hand resting on Tun's arm. The hopeful siege had penetrated her defenses not as an invasion, but as an invitation. The mobile, the books, Chairman the Bear, the redecorated sunroom, they weren't just gifts. They were promises of support, of a village, of a love ready to spill over. She looked at her husband, his profile illuminated by the dashboard lights. "You know," she said quietly, breaking the comfortable silence. "I think I might be late." Tun's grip on the steering wheel tightened. He didn't say anything for a full minute. The weight of his mother's hope, his father's memory, and their own private longing settling in the space between them. A slow, tremulous smile spread across his face, a mirror of the one dawning on her own. The hopeful siege, built on patience, love, and an unwavering belief in the future, had finally found its mark. The silent mansion, the empty quarters, the waiting teddy bear, all were about to be summoned from the realm of hope into the world of glorious, noisy fact. Reinforcements arrived. The news, when it finally came, did not travel through a phone line first. It arrived as a seismic shift in the atmosphere, a psychic tremor that seemed to emanate from Ikoyi and ripple across the lagoon to Victoria Island. Madame Funk was in her sunroom, ostensibly reviewing a quarterly report, but her eyes were fixed on a pair of weaver birds building a frenetic, intricate nest in the flame tree outside. The focused, hopeful energy of their work held her captive. Her private line, the one only 4 people had the number 4, rang. Not Tun's usual Saturday time. Now, midweek, afternoon. Her heart, an old soldier that had weathered decades of market crashes and personal tragedy, executed a slow, heavy roll in her chest. She picked up the phone. She did not say hello. There was a breath on the other end. Then Tun's voice, thick with an emotion she couldn't immediately name. Awe, terror, joy. Mama. That one word, in that tone, was the codebreaker's cipher. The universe clicked into a new, dazzling alignment. The hopeful siege was over. Victory was declared. "Say it," she commanded, her own voice a whisper of steel. "Kayamika is pregnant." A sound escaped Madame Funk, a sharp, punched-out gasp that was part laugh, part sob, part war cry. The quarterly report fluttered from her lap, pages scattering like white doves across the dark marble. She pressed a fist to her mouth, her eyes screwed shut, seeing not the room but a future exploding into color and sound. "Praise God." The words erupted from her, forceful and reverent. "Praise the Almighty." "How is she? How far along? What did the doctor say? Is she resting? Where is she now?" The questions were a machine gun burst of maternal and grandmaternal instinct. Tund, laughing now, the tension broken, tried to answer. "She's fine, Mama. She's right here. Just a few weeks. Doctor says everything is perfect. She's glowing. Put her on. Let me hear her voice." Kayamika's voice came on, warm and slightly tearful. "Hello, madam." "Madam? Omomi. You will call me Mama now. From today, you are the carrier of my joy. How do you feel? Tell me everything." After a 15-minute conversation that covered symptoms, cravings, a sudden, intense desire for Ugba and garden eggs, which Madame Funk noted with the seriousness of a general receiving vital intelligence, and strict orders for absolute rest, Madame Funk hung up. She sat perfectly still for 60 seconds, the silence around her no longer empty, but charged, pregnant with potential. Then, she moved. She became a vortex of decisive action. The lonely widow vanished, replaced by the CEO of the Aliyu dynasty, launching her most critical project. Her first call was not to her board, but to her head of domestic staff. "Ibrahim, assemble the senior household staff in the main hall in 30 minutes. There is a new protocol." Next, she called the director of the elite domestic agency she used for sourcing staff for her corporate apartments. "I need 2 live-in domestic assistants. Top of your roster. Fluent in English and Yoruba. 1, a nutritional specialist, experienced in prenatal and postnatal care. The other, an expert in household management and hygiene. Impeccable references. Non-negotiable. I want their profiles, backgrounds, and medical histories on my desk in 2 hours. They are to be deployed to my son's residence in Ikoyi by tonight." She then called her personal physician. "Dr. Adesina, you will be the primary consultant for my daughter-in-law, Kayamika Aliyu. She is expecting. I want a full prenatal plan drafted, the best obstetrician in Lagos assigned. Who is it? Dr. Adebayo at Reddington? Secure her. I want weekly checkups, the best of everything. Send the bill to me directly. Finally, she called her driver. Prepare the Mercedes. We are going to Ikoyi. First, to the finest fruit market in Victoria Island. Then to the house. Within 4 hours of receiving the news, Madame Funk stood at the threshold of Tund and Kayamika's penthouse. Behind her, Ibrahim and the driver carried baskets overflowing with exotic fruits, bundles of bitter leaf and scent leaf for nutritious soups, and bottles of the most expensive prenatal vitamins money could source. But the true reinforcements were the two women who stood flanking her, their demeanors calm and capable. Adesawa, tall and serene, was the nutritionist, her bag containing meal plans and organic ingredients. Neoma, younger but with keen, intelligent eyes, was the household manager. Tund, Kayamika, Madame Funk announced, sweeping in and kissing them both. Meet Adesawa and Neoma. They are here for you. Adesawa will handle all meals, supplements, and ensure Kayamika's nutritional needs are met perfectly. Neoma will manage the home, cleaning, laundry, shopping. Kayamika, your only job is to grow my grandchild and rest. You will not lift a finger. You will not stress. Is that understood? Tund was stunned. Mama, this is too much. We have a part-time help already. Part-time is insufficient for a full-time miracle, Madame Funk stated, brooking no argument. She turned to Kayamika, her voice softening. My dear, you have given me the greatest gift. Allow me to shoulder the burdens. Let me do this. For you. For my grandchild. For Bayo. The look in her eyes, first love, vulnerable hope, disarmed any further protest. Kayamika, touched and overwhelmed, simply nodded. Thank you, Mama. Madame Funk then conducted a brief tour of the penthouse, issuing gentle directives. This room will be the nursery. We will begin preparations next week. Neoma, you will ensure all cleaning products used are non-toxic. Adesawa, the kitchen is yours. Before she left, she took Kayamika's hands in hers. The older woman's hands, usually so firm and commanding, were trembling slightly. You have filled the silence, she whispered, her voice thick. You have given me back the future. That night, in the silent mansion, Madame Funk did not go to the empty grandchildren's quarters. Instead, she went to Bayo's study. She sat in his leather chair, the one she never used, and looked at his portrait. Bayo, she said aloud to the smiling face in the photograph. It has begun. The reinforcements have arrived. Our line continues. For the first time in 8 years, the silence in the room felt like a companionable pause, not a void. It was the quiet of a ship that had finally caught the wind, its sails snapping full, racing toward a glorious, promised horizon. The siege was over. The nurturing had begun. Triple the joy, quadruple the blessing. The first trimester passed in a blur of ginger tea, meticulous meal plans from Adesawa, and a level of care Kayamika found both touching and, at times, smotheringly sweet. Neoma had organized the penthouse with military precision, rendering Kayamika's former role as co-manager of her own home utterly obsolete. She read novels, sketched building designs she had no intention of submitting, and napped under the watchful, fuzzy gaze of Chairman the Bear. Madame Funk's Saturday calls evolved into near-daily check-ins. How did she sleep? Did the augury in the soup agree with her? Has she felt any movement? The questions were specific, born of voracious research and a lifetime of wanting. The hopeful siege had transformed into an occupation of pure, undiluted service. The day of the first major scan arrived, cloaked in a significance that felt holy. Madame Funk insisted on accompanying them. It is a family occasion, she declared, and no one dared disagree. They rode together in the spacious Mercedes, a silent, nervous trio. Madame Funk held Kayamika's hand tightly, her usual composure replaced by a palpable, vibrating anxiety. In the cool, dim ultrasound room at Reddington Hospital, the world narrowed to the hum of the machine and the blurry gray and white universe on the monitor. The sonographer, a cheerful woman used to nervous parents, moved the probe with practiced ease. Ah, there's the little one, she said, pointing to a flickering, bean-shaped shadow. Strong heartbeat. Perfect. Madame Funk's grip on Kayamika's hand tightened, her eyes flooding. Thank you, Jesus, she breathed. But the sonographer's brow furrowed slightly. She moved the probe, adjusted a setting. A slow smile spread across her face. Well now, let's have another look here. It seems our little one is not so alone. Silence. What do you mean? Tund asked, leaning forward. The sonographer chuckled. I mean, Mr. and Mrs. Aliu, madam, congratulations are in even higher order. Look here, and here. She pointed, and as if by magic, two more distinct, flickering shapes resolved on the screen, clustered close to the first. 3. The sonographer announced, her voice bright with delight. You're having triplets. The word hung in the sterile air, triplets. For a moment, no one moved. Then, a sound like a dam breaking erupted from Madame Funk. It was a full-throated, unguarded cry of pure, undiluted triumph. She threw her arms around a stunned Kayamika, then pulled a shell-shocked Tund into the hug, weeping and laughing. Triplets. Bayo, do you hear? 3. She shouted, as if her husband were in the next room. 3 seeds. 3 blessings. Oh, my clever, wonderful children. Tund looked from the screen to his wife's wide, astonished eyes, his own mind doing frantic calculations about square footage, car seats, college funds. Kayamika's hand went instinctively to her still flat stomach, a new awe dawning. 3. From that moment, Madame Funk's planning shifted into a gear no one knew existed. The grandchildren's quarters in her mansion were immediately reconceptualized. One nursery became 3. She commissioned identical cribs, but in different, subtle shades of cream, ivory, and oat. She hired a 3rd live-in assistant, a certified nurse midwife, to join the household staff. Her conversations were now peppered with logistical poetry. The triplet prams from London have arrived. Or, we must reinforce the floor in the nursery for 3 rocking chairs. The world, it seemed, had answered her loneliness not with a whisper, but with a chorus. Kayamika's pregnancy became a celebrated public event within the Aliu sphere. Her body, blooming with miraculous life, was treated as sacred ground. Madame Funk's joy was a force of nature, bending reality around it. Yet, for Kayamika, the physical reality was becoming increasingly formidable. The weeks rolled on, and her belly swelled to a breathtaking, taut dome that seemed to defy physics. She moved with the careful, swaying gait of someone carrying precious, fragile cargo. The doctor appointments grew more frequent, the sonograms more crowded. They're all growing beautifully, Dr. Adebayo would say, but her expert eyes would sometimes linger on the scans, a hint of professional concentration deepening. Quite a party in there. 2 weeks before the scheduled cesarean section, during a routine checkup, the doctor's demeanor changed. She moved the ultrasound probe with intense focus, her smile becoming fixed. She called in a senior colleague. A hushed consultation ensued over the flickering screen, filled with medical terminology that sounded like a foreign language to the anxious family. Mrs. Aliu, Dr. Adebayo finally said, turning to them with a look of profound amazement. It appears we've had a very shy 4th guest. The positioning, the way baby A was curled, we missed it. You're not carrying 3. You're carrying 4. The silence this time was absolute, total, as if all sound had been sucked from the universe. 4. Madame Funk, for the first time in living memory, was speechless. Her mouth opened, but no sound emerged. She stared at the screen, where 4 distinct, squirming heartbeats now pulsed unmistakably. Tund sank into a chair, running his hands over his face. Quadruplets, he whispered, the word itself feeling monumental. Kayamika simply began to cry. Tears of shock, of fear, of overwhelming, impossible love. The revelation triggered a state of high-alert bliss. Security was discreetly doubled at the penthouse. The nurse midwife was given 2 assistants. Madame Funk's mansion became a logistics hub for quadruplet preparedness. The word triplets was hastily scratched off orders and replaced with quads. When the delivery day arrived, it was less a medical procedure and more a military and spiritual operation. Madame Funk paced the private hospital waiting room like a lioness, praying in Yoruba and issuing quiet commands on her phone simultaneously. Tund, gowned and masked, held Kayamika's hand in the operating theater, his eyes wide above his surgical cap. Then, one after another, in a swift, miraculous procession, the cries began. Sharp, protesting, beautiful wails that sliced through the antiseptic air. A girl. Temi. A boy. Toby. A boy. Teo. A girl. Tonia. 4 tiny, Perfect, wriggling lives, each with a powerful set of lungs. They were small but fierce, whisked gently to warming stations where teams of specialists tended to them. When Tund, pale and trembling with emotion, emerged to tell his mother, he didn't need to speak. The triumph on his face said it all. 4. Madame Funk breathed, her hands clasped under her chin. 2 boys. 2 girls. They're all here. They're perfect. Madame Funk Aliyu, the billionaire, the matriarch, the unshakable force, collapsed into a chair. Great. Heaving sobs shook her frame, not of sadness, but of a release so profound it remade her. The decades of building, the years of silence, the hopeful siege, it had all converged on this moment, yielding not a single answer, but an abundance. A multiplication of blessings. She had prayed for an echo to fill her silence. God, in his magnificent humor and grace, had sent a symphony. The empty throne was now surrounded. The legacy that breathed had arrived, in Quadruplet, a grandma's first reign. For the first 2 weeks, the Ikoyi penthouse ceased to be a home and became the command center for a delicate, miraculous operation. It buzzed with a hushed, purposeful energy. The new additions, Temi, Toby, Teo, and Tonia, were tiny sovereigns, their every whimper and sigh dictating the movements of a devoted court. Madame Funk had, of course, moved in. She arrived an hour after the new family returned from the hospital, her suitcases filled not with clothes, but with silk-soft receiving blankets, herbal balms from a revered Ibadan Babalawo, and a staggering number of identical white cotton vests. She had politely but firmly dismissed the part-time help and installed her own expanded team. The nutritionist Adesawa, the household manager Neoma, the nurse midwife F, and 2 brisk, efficient nursery assistants. Her reign had begun. She established her headquarters in the large living room, which had been partially converted. State-of-the-art bottle warmers stood next to an imported espresso machine. A giant whiteboard was mounted on one wall, tracking feedings, sleep schedules, and diaper changes in 4 different colored columns with a precision that would impress a Fortune 500 CEO. Consistency is the cornerstone, she announced to the sometimes dazed parents. If we are regimented now, we cultivate peace later. And regimented they were. Madame Funk was a benevolent dictator, her authority born of boundless love and an iron will. She presided over the 3-hour feeding cycles like a high priestess. The babies would be brought from the nursery, and she would direct the orchestration. Tund on the sofa with Toby, Kayamika in the armchair with Temi, a nursery assistant in the rocking chair with Teo, and Madame Funk herself, in the prime position by the window, would cradle Tonia. The synchronized suckling, the gentle patting of backs, the soft burps. It was a ritual of survival and love that bound them all. At night, she would take the graveyard shift with F, insisting the exhausted parents get a 4-hour block of uninterrupted sleep. Tun would find her in the soft lamplight of the nursery at 3 a.m., humming an old Yoruba lullaby to a fussy Teo, her eyes tired but glowing with a contentment so deep it was sacred. Her plans, however, quickly expanded beyond the penthouse walls. As the babies reached their 1-month milestone, her ambitions soared. "We must take them to the family house in Ascot for the summer," she declared one morning over a breakfast she had not touched, her finger tracing a map on her tablet. "The air is clean. There is so much garden. I have already contacted the architect about converting the conservatory into a sun-drenched playroom." Tund and Kayamika exchanged a glance. It was Kayamika who spoke gently, cradling a sleeping Temi. "Mama, there's so little. The travel alone. Nonsense. We will take the jet. It will be perfectly climate-controlled. I will have a pediatrician on standby in London. They need stimulation. New environments." A week later, it was a safari lodge in Kenya. Imagine the visuals. The gentle animals. To introduce them to the majesty of nature from the cradle. "Mama, they can't lift their heads yet," Tun said, rubbing his temples. A lion would look like a big, blurry beige rug to them. Madame Funk waved a dismissive hand. "It is about the essence, the energy of the wild." Next came a cultural tour of Japan. Discipline and beauty. It would shape their aesthetic sensibilities. The proposals were a torrent, each one a reflection of her desire to pour the entire world at the feet of her 4 treasures. She wanted to give them everything she had accumulated, every experience, every vista, immediately. Her loneliness had been so vast, her yearning so deep that now the floodgates were open. The deluge was overwhelming. The clash was inevitable. It came not as a fight, but as a quiet, firm stand. It was late evening. The babies, bathed and fed, were down in their cribs. The penthouse was peaceful. Madame Funk was showing Kayamika swatches of fabric for the custom-made bassinets for the private jet. This Belgian linen is exquisite, you see, and hypoallergenic. Mama, Kayamika interrupted softly. She placed a hand over the swatches. We are so grateful. For everything. For you. We could not have done these first weeks without you. Madame Funk beamed, but the smile faded as she saw the seriousness in her daughter-in-law's eyes. But, Kayamika continued, Tund and I, we need to find our rhythm now. As a family, the six of us. These trips, these grand plans, they are beautiful. But they are for later. Right now, they just need their home. Their parents. Simple things. Tund moved to stand beside his wife, a united front. She's right, Mama. You have given us the greatest help. Your time, your love, your expertise. But we need to learn to be the parents of 4 babies ourselves. In our own space. With our own mistakes. Madame Funk looked between them, her face a canvas of conflicting emotions, hurt, understanding, pride, and a piercing sense of impending loss. The command center was being decommissioned. Her reign, however glorious, was provisional. You are sending me away? The words were barely a whisper, laced with a vulnerability she never showed the world. No, Tun said, taking her hands. Never. We are asking you to be our most trusted advisor, not our commander-in-chief. Come for Sundays, spoiling days, but let us build our own foundation here, just as you and Daddy did. There was a long silence. Madame Funk looked towards the nursery, where the soft sounds of 4 sleeping infants drifted out. She had waited a lifetime for this noise. The thought of returning to the silence of her mansion was a physical pain. But she looked at her son and his wife, tired, but resolute, standing together in the home they were building. And she saw Bayo and herself a lifetime ago. Her shoulders, usually so square, slumped slightly in surrender. It was the hardest, and perhaps the most loving, decision of her campaign. One more week, she bargained, her voice thick. Let me help you establish the next routine. And you will bring them every Friday for lunch. Without fail. It was a treaty. The parents nodded, relief and gratitude washing over them. The final week of her reign was tinged with a sweet melancholy. She poured all her knowledge into them, writing meticulous notes, ensuring every detail was handed over. On her last day, she held each baby for a long time, inhaling their milky scent, memorizing the weight of them in her arms. As her driver loaded her bags into the car, she stood in the doorway of the penthouse. The living room was no longer a command center, just a living room. The whiteboard was gone. The castle will be waiting, she said, trying to smile, for when they are ready for adventures. She kissed them all, her lips lingering on each tiny forehead. Then, she walked to the elevator, not allowing herself to look back. The doors closed on the sound of a baby's gurgle and the sight of her son's family, whole and together. The drive back to Victoria Island was quiet. The mansion, when she entered, was silent. But this time, the silence was different. It was no longer empty. It was filled with echoes, the ghostly memory of 4 little cries, the phantom weight of a tiny head on her shoulder, the promise of Friday lunches. Her reign as live-in grandmother was over. But her kingdom, she realized, her heart aching with love and loss, had only just begun to expand. It now had a bustling, noisy colony across the lagoon, and her throne here would be a waiting place, a launchpad for the spoiling yet to come. A foundation of love. The silence that reclaimed the Aliyu mansion was a different creature this time. It was no longer a desolate expanse, but a library of new, treasured echoes. Madame Funk would often sit in her sunroom and close her eyes, conjuring the precise timbre of Temmie's hungry cry, the surprised coo Toby made when he found his own fist, the determined kick of Teyo's legs, the serene, wide-eyed gaze of Tonia. The quiet was now a canvas upon which she could paint the vibrant memories of Friday afternoons, her weekly lifeline. Across the lagoon, the Ikoyi penthouse was a world transformed, a beautiful, chaotic ecosystem built on the twin pillars of love and logistics. With Madame Funk's military-style support system withdrawn, Tund and Kayamika faced the raw, magnificent reality of parenting quadruplets. The first month alone was a blur of survival, a cycle of feedings, diaper changes, and snatched moments of sleep. But as the babies grew, graduating from fragile newborns to sturdy, inquisitive infants, their parents' philosophy began to take concrete shape. Their love was not the grand, spoiling kind that arrived in gift-wrapped boxes every Friday. It was a daily, deliberate architecture. Kayamika, drawing on her own disciplined upbringing and her architectural mind, believed in structure. A strong foundation can bear any weight, she'd tell Tund as they synchronized bedtime routines. Tund, inspired by his father's gentle strength and his mother's strategic planning, focused on the framework of values. Their home became a place of gentle rhythms. Mornings began not with cartoons, but with soft Yoruba hymns or classical music playing in the background as the family shared breakfast. The sprawling living room was carefully zoned, a soft playmat area with building blocks and textured books, a quiet corner with cushions for reading, a music station with simple drums and shakers. There were no flashing, noisy plastic toys. Their playthings were wooden, solid, and required imagination. Discipline was introduced early, not as punishment, but as the natural consequence of order. A thrown toy meant the toy was put away for a short time. A squabble over a block resulted in a calm intervention and a lesson in sharing. Their voices were rarely raised. Instead, they used a firm, calm tone the children learned to recognize as final. Timmy, the sensitive firstborn, would often well up at a simple, stern no, while Toby, the bold explorer, required more consistent, patient reinforcement. The centerpiece of their world was the family time, each evening after dinner. The television remained off. Instead, they would gather on the large rug. Some nights, Tund would tell stories, not just fairy tales, but parables about honesty, kindness, and courage, often starring a clever tortoise or a brave hunter. Other nights, Kayamika would lead them in simple songs or help them trace their hands on paper to create a growing gallery of family art. Prayer was a non-negotiable bookend to their days. Grace before meals, thanks before bed. The children learned to clasp their tiny hands and bow their heads, murmuring along to their parents' words. Visits to Grandma's mansion were the sparkling exception to their routine, and the contrast was not lost on the children, even at a young age. Fridays were days of heightened anticipation. Madame Funk's home was a palace of instant gratification, a drawer full of musical toys, a kitchen that produced cookies like magic, a garden with a koi pond they were allowed to splash near. She would engulf them in perfumed hugs, her laughter loud and unrestrained. They would return home buzzed on sugar and excitement, often crashing into tears when confronted with their usual glass of milk and early bedtime. "Why can't we live with Grandma?" Toby asked once after a particularly lavish Friday, clutching a new toy helicopter. Tund had knelt to his level. "Grandma's house is for fun visits. Our home is for growing strong hearts and wise minds. You need both." It was a delicate balance to maintain. Kayamika sometimes worried the children would come to see their own home as the strict, boring place. But slowly, the proof of their foundation began to show. At a toddler playgroup when they were 3, a boy snatched a toy car from Tayo. Instead of hitting or wailing, Tayo, his little brow furrowed, looked at the boy and said firmly, "Not kind. We share." The playgroup facilitator had marveled to Kayamika afterwards. When Temi fell and scraped her knee, she didn't scream for long. She sought out Kayamika, allowed herself to be comforted, and then, taking a cue from her parents, said a little, "Thank you, Jesus, for it not being worse." They had their challenges, tantrums in public places, food thrown in defiance, the endless energy of 4, but Tund and Kayamika faced them as a united team. They tag-teamed bath time and bedtime stories. They had weekly meetings after the children were asleep to discuss what was working, what wasn't, and how to better align their parenting. Madame Funk watched this foundation being built during her Friday visits with a complex mixture of pride and a faint, unacknowledged sense of irrelevance. She saw the calm authority her children had with their own children, the respect in the quadruplets' eyes when their parents spoke. She saw the deep, unshakable bond between the 6 of them, a private universe of inside jokes, understood routines, and a quiet, fierce loyalty. They didn't need her spoiling. They had something more durable. One Friday, She arrived to find the children helping to set the table for lunch, each carrying a single, light plate with immense concentration. Neoma moved to intervene, but Kayamika gently shook her head. They can do it, Mama. They're learning. Later, when Tonia spilled her water, she immediately said, "Sorry, Mummy," and scrambled down to fetch a cloth from the kitchen, a tiny act of responsibility that stunned Madame Funk. That night, as her driver took her back to her silent mansion, the usual post-visit melancholy was tinged with a new emotion. It was all. Her son and his wife were not just raising children. They were building characters. They were creating a family culture that was strong, kind, and rooted. The legacy that breathed was not just alive. It was being sculpted with intention and profound love. Her mansion felt emptier than ever upon her return. But as she walked past the still unused, lavish grandchildren's quarters, she no longer saw a neglected promise. She saw a future guest wing. The Real Foundation, the heartbeat of the Aliyu future, was thriving across the water, in a penthouse filled with wooden blocks, evening prayers, and the steadfast love of two devoted parents. Her role, she was beginning to understand, was not to be the sun in their sky, but a brilliant, occasional comet, bringing wonder, excitement, and a reminder that beyond the strong walls of home, there existed a world of boundless, sparkling possibility. The call to duty. The seasons turned in the Aliyu household, marked not by weather but by the steady, miraculous growth of four small humans. The Quadruplets, now 4 years old, were a vibrant testament to their parents' dedication. They were a unit, yet distinctly individual. Timmy, thoughtful and observant. Toby, a bundle of kinetic energy with a laugh that could startle birds. Teo, the quiet problem solver with a stubborn streak. And Tonia, the expressive diplomat who could negotiate an extra story with devastating charm. Their world was secure, a cocoon of love and gentle discipline. But even the strongest foundations can be shaken by the tremors of life's unforeseen demands. It began with a persistent ache, a deep-seated fatigue that Kayamika could no longer attribute to the monumental task of mothering 4 preschoolers. Aches bloomed in her lower abdomen, stubborn and dull. She mentioned it to Tund, then to her doctor. Tests were run. The diagnosis, when it came, was straightforward but serious. Multiple uterine fibroids, large and symptomatic. They were benign, but they were thieves, stealing her energy, causing pain, and posing a risk for future complications. The doctor's recommendation was clear: a myomectomy. Surgery. It was a routine procedure, but it required time to prepare, to undergo the operation, and most importantly, to recover properly. A few weeks of true rest, Mrs. Aliyu, the doctor stressed. No lifting, no running after little ones. You need to heal. A few weeks. The phrase hung in the air of their serene penthouse like a clap of thunder. A few weeks without their mother's steadying presence. A few weeks of managing 4 energetic 4-year-olds alone. Tund, though a hands-on father, knew his limits. His work demanded his attention, and the logistics of caring for the children solo, even with their trusted live-in nanny's help, felt insurmountable for an extended period. One quiet evening, after the children were tucked in bed, the weight of it settled between them at the kitchen island. The soft nightlights of Ikoyi twinkled outside. "We could ask Mama," Tund said quietly, the words feeling both obvious and momentous. Kayamika nodded, stirring her cup of tea. "It's the only real solution, isn't it? The nanny can go with them. Your mother has the space, the staff, and the desire." She offered a tired smile. She's been waiting for an extended audience with them since the day they were born. There was no jealousy in her statement, only a factual recognition of a grandmother's boundless love. They both knew that Madame Funk's Friday spoiling was a contained event, a treat the children understood as separate from their everyday lives. But a few weeks? That was a different story. It was an immersion. Tund made the call the next morning. He didn't soften the medical details. He presented it as it was, a need. "Mama, Kayamika needs surgery. She must rest completely afterwards. We need your help with the children. Could they stay with you for the few weeks we are away?" On the other end of the line, in the sun-drenched silence of her mansion, Madame Funk did not immediately reply. He could hear her breath, a soft intake. Then, a sound he hadn't heard in years. A pure, undiluted note of triumph, swiftly swallowed. "Of course," she said, her voice layered with genuine concern and a barely contained thrill. Of course, Okome. Do not worry about a single thing. This is my duty. My purpose. Bring them to me. We will manage everything. You focus on Kayamika's health. Her tone was so assured, so capable, that a wave of relief washed over Tund. The logistical mountain crumbled. This was the solution. The conversation with the children was careful. Kayamika sat them down during their evening family time. Mummy has a poorly tummy that the doctors need to fix, she explained in simple terms. So Daddy and I are going to go on a special trip to the hospital to make it better. While we're away, you're going to have the biggest, most fun holiday with Grandma. The reaction was mixed. Tonia's eyes lit up. Grandma's house. The fish pond. Toby hooped. Ice cream every day. But Timmy, the perceptive one, frowned. For sleepovers? Many sleepovers. Yes, my love. For many sleepovers, Kayamika said, pulling her close. Teo simply asked, You will come back? The question, so blunt and vulnerable, pierced them both. Oh, Teo, Tun said, gathering him up. We will come back. This is just so Mummy can get strong and run with you again. Preparations were made. Suitcases were packed with familiar pajamas, well-loved stuffed animals, and the children's simple, sturdy clothes. Kayamika wrote out detailed schedules, food preferences, and bedtime routines, though she knew, in her heart, these pages were more for her own comfort than for her mother-in-law's adherence. The day of departure arrived. Madame Funk sent her largest SUV, driven by Ibrahim himself, to collect them. The farewell on the penthouse driveway was a tender, tearful tangle. The children, excited but suddenly clingy, were loaded into the plush vehicle with their nanny. Be good. Listen to Grandma. We love you so, so much, Kayamika whispered, kissing each damp cheek through the open window. We'll call every day, Tund promised, his voice thick. As the car pulled away, Toby and Tonia waved frantically, already chattering about the pond. Timmy pressed her face to the glass, her expression solemn. Teo just watched them until the car turned the corner. Standing on the driveway, the silence felt immense. Their home, usually bursting with life, felt like a shell. They'll be fine, Tund said, squeezing Kayamika's hand. I know, she replied, leaning into him. But will we? They turned and went back inside to finish packing their own, much smaller, bags for the hospital. The call to duty had been answered, not by them this time, but by the one person whose love for their children was as vast and deep as their own. They were entrusting their most precious treasures to her, and with that trust came a silent, unspoken prayer that the foundation they had built over 4 years would be strong enough to withstand a few weeks of unbridled, billionaire-esque love. The guardians of the foundation were stepping away, leaving the gates to the glittering kingdom wide open. The grand acquisition. The moment the SUV passed through the towering, wrought-iron gates of the Aliyu estate, the air itself seemed to change. It grew thicker, sweeter, charged with possibility. For the Quadruplets, the journey across the lagoon was a transition from the familiar map of home to the edge of a glittering, uncharted continent. Grandma's house wasn't just a house. It was a sovereign nation where she was the absolute monarch, and they, as of today, were the newly arrived, celebrated royalty. Madame Funk stood waiting at the top of the marble front steps, a vision in a flowing cream booba and matching iro. She did not merely stand, she presided. Her smile was not the warm, Friday afternoon smile they knew. It was radiant, triumphant, a sun dawning on her personal golden age. The car doors were opened by smartly uniformed staff. Before the nanny could even unbuckle a seatbelt, Madame Funk descended, her arms wide. My darlings, welcome to your holiday kingdom. She swept them into a collective embrace, a cloud of her expensive jasmine perfume enveloping them. They were led not through the formal front entrance, but through the side gardens, past the shimmering koi pond Tonia immediately pointed at with a gasp. Fish, big fish. We shall feed them later, my treasure, Madame Funk promised. Whatever you wish. The grand acquisition had begun. It was not a takeover, but a liberation. The first decree was issued in the grand foyer, its ceiling soaring away into a dome of stained glass. Neoma, Madame Funk said to their usual nanny, her tone kindly but firm. You have had a long journey. Please, go with Ibrahim. He will show you to the staff quarters where you may rest. The children and I have much to discuss. It was a gentle but effective dismissal. For these first few weeks, the intermediary of their parents' chosen help was unnecessary. Madame Funk was taking personal command. She led them to what she now called the grandchildren's palace, the East Wing suite that had waited for years. But it was no longer a museum of hopeful furniture. It had been activated. The door opened to reveal not one, but four magnificent miniature beds, each shaped like a different racing car for the boys and a different fairy tale carriage for the girls. The walls were painted with murals of savannas and space adventures. In the center of the room was a mountain of plush toys so vast it looked like a soft, colorful hill. The children stood frozen, their mouths agape. Their shared bedroom at home had tidy bunk beds and a shelf for toys. This was a fantasy. "This is your room," Madame Funk announced, her voice throbbing with pleasure at their awe. "For as long as you are here, everything in it is yours." The second decree concerned luggage. Their familiar suitcases were brought in. "Now," Madame Funk said, clapping her hands lightly, "we must prepare for our first adventure. Let us see what you have brought." She opened the cases. Her elegant nose wrinkled ever so slightly at the sight of the simple cotton shorts, the practical t-shirts, the well-worn sandals. These were the uniforms of the commoners, not the regalia of princes and princesses. "Ah, these are fine for home," she said diplomatically. "But here, we need special holiday clothes." With a dramatic flourish, she opened the doors of a huge armoire they hadn't noticed. It was filled with tiny, impeccable outfits. Miniature linen suits for the boys, elaborate lace-trimmed dresses for the girls, tiny leather loafers, and sparkly sandals. "Everything must be new for a new holiday," she declared. "We shall have a fashion show." The next hour was a whirlwind. Their comfortable, familiar clothes were gently, irrevocably set aside. Toby and Tayo were transformed into little lords in crisp shorts and polo shirts with discreet crests. Temmie and Tonia were twirled in frothy dresses, their hair quickly and expertly styled by a waiting beautician into intricate braids adorned with tiny, real pearls. When they were presented to the full-length mirror, for strangers stared back, polished, gleaming, and utterly dazzling. They preened, they twirled. The old rules of home, "Don't get dirty, be careful with your clothes," seemed to belong to a distant, gray country. The final, most powerful decree was the suspension of time itself. Madame Funk consulted no schedule. When Toby mentioned it was nearly lunchtime, she smiled. "Is it? Well, lunch can wait. First, a tour of the kitchens. Chef has prepared a special welcome treat." The treat was not a balanced meal. It was a sculpture of ice cream. 8 different flavors, with rivers of hot fudge, avalanches of sprinkles, and cookie turrets. They ate it in the formal dining room, on gold-rimmed plates, at 11:30 in the morning. The nanny, had she been present, would have paled. The children's eyes were wide with a kind of holy disbelief. As they dug in, sticky and ecstatic, Madame Funk watched from the head of the table, her chin resting on her steepled fingers. Her heart was a drum of pure, unadulterated joy. The silence was gone, replaced by the clatter of spoons on china, by Toby's ecstatic moan, by Tonia's giggle as chocolate smeared her chin. This was what she had dreamed of in all those lonely years. Not just the presence of grandchildren, but the absolute freedom to love them in her own magnificent way, without compromise, without the moderating influence of their parents' sensible foundations. She was not building character here. She was building monuments to delight. When the first video call from Tund and Kayamika came that evening, the children were barely recognizable. They crowded the iPad screen, a kaleidoscope of new clothes and glittering hair accessories, talking over each other about the car beds, the ice cream mountain, the promise of feeding the koi tomorrow. "We're having so much fun, Daddy," Toby yelled. "Grandma says we can have pancakes for dinner," Tonia added. Kayamika, lying in her hospital bed, smiled, though it didn't quite reach her worried eyes. "That sounds lovely, my loves. Be good for Grandma." After the call ended, Madame Funk looked at her 4 acquisitions, tired now from the day's excitement, but buzzing with a new energy. They were hers. Truly, completely, for the first time. The gates to the kingdom were not just open. The drawbridge had been raised behind them. The foundation of home was now a pleasant, distant memory, obscured by the glorious, glittering fog of a grandma's boundless, unsupervised love. The holiday had officially begun, and its only rule was her wish. The festival of yes. The first full day at Grandma's mansion dawned not with the soft, familiar sounds of their Ikoyi home, but with the distant, melodic chime of a grandfather clock somewhere in the vastness of the house. For a moment, the quadruplets lay in their fantastical beds, blinking at the alien murals on the ceiling. Then, the memory of the previous day rushed back: the ice cream, the new clothes, the sheer, limitless scale of everything. It was like waking up inside a dream. The dream's curator arrived with the morning sun. Madame Funk swept into the room, not with a gentle good morning, but with an agenda of wonder. "Rise and shine, my little sovereigns," she announced, her voice bright. "The day is waiting, and it is too full of marvels to waste." There was no slow, cuddly wake-up. No simple breakfast of oatmeal and fruit. Breakfast was a feast laid out in the sunroom. Silver trays of fluffy pancakes shaped like animals, towers of Belgian waffles, bowls of chocolate cereal banned at home, and freshly squeezed juices in colors that didn't exist in nature. They ate in their pajamas, syrup dripping onto the silk upholstery, and no one scolded them. A maid simply appeared with a warm, damp cloth, smiling. "Now," Madame Funk said, as the last crumb was consumed, "we must prepare for our expedition." The expedition was a shopping trip to the Palms, the most exclusive mall in Lagos. But it wasn't shopping as their parents knew it, a purposeful trip for shoes or a birthday gift. This was a safari, and the prey was anything that sparked a flicker of desire in a 4-year-old's eye. They descended upon the boutiques like a small, well-dressed hurricane, with Madame Funk as the calm, opulent eye of the storm. In the children's luxury store, she didn't ask what they needed. She observed. Toby lingered by a remote-controlled drone. "Look, Grandma, it flies. We shall take two," Madame Funk told the attendant. "In case one has a mishap." Teo was fascinated by an elaborate, multi-level car garage with a working elevator. "Wrap it up." Temi touched a princess costume so encrusted with sequins it shimmered like a living thing. In her size. And the matching slippers. Tonia pointed at a giant stuffed giraffe nearly as tall as she was. "Have it delivered." They didn't try things on. They pointed and received. Bags multiplied around Ibrahim, who followed patiently, a silent mountain accumulating brightly colored boxes. The children, initially wide-eyed, began to adopt an air of casual expectation. Of course the giraffe was theirs. Of course they needed 2 drones. This was the natural order of Grandma's world. Lunch was at the mall's most famous ice cream parlor. They didn't choose cones. They were presented with a tasting platter, 20 miniature scoops of every flavor, with all the toppings. They ate until their lips were stained blue and green, their bellies tight and buzzing with sugar. The concept of enough had been erased. The afternoon was a blur of more acquisitions. A toy store where they were told to fill a basket. They needed 3 baskets. A confectionery where they were given small silver scoops to fill bags with gourmet jelly beans. A visit to a children's spa where the girls got princess manicures and the boys got explorers massages with fizzy rocks that smelled of pine. When they returned to the mansion, the mountain of new possessions was carried to their wing, creating a second, larger range of plastic and plush next to the first. There was no instruction to tidy up, to put things away. The room was to be a landscape of joy, a testament to abundance. Dinner was not at a table, but as a picnic in the home cinema room, where they ate miniature pizzas and watched not 1, but 3 animated movies back-to-back, curled on a pile of velvet cushions. Bedtime, when it finally came, was a nebulous concept. They drifted to sleep during the second film, sugar-crashed and blissful, carried to their car and carriage beds without ever brushing their teeth. The next day repeated the theme, with variations. A visit to a private zoo on the estate of one of Madame Funk's friends, where they fed giraffes from a platform. A make-your-own Sunday bar for afternoon snack. A call from their parents came, and they chattered breathlessly about the giraffe feeding and the new talking robot that Teo got. "Are you remembering to say your prayers?" Kayamika's voice came through, thin and worried over the speaker. "Grandma says we can pray to the ice cream gods." Toby giggled, repeating a joke Madame Funk had made. There was a strained silence from the hospital room before Tund quickly changed the subject. The Festival of Yes was an immersive experience. The structured pillars of their life, mealtimes, bedtimes, moderation, responsibility, had been vaporized. In their place was a continuous, dazzling fireworks display of gratification. Madame Funk watched it all with deep, soul-quenching satisfaction. Their laughter was her symphony, their satiation her masterpiece. She was not filling a void anymore. She was creating a new reality, a paradise where her love was measured in scoops of ice cream and stacks of unopened toys. The children, adaptable and young, began to shift. Their polite please and thank you remained, but it was now deployed to greater effect, to access more of the endless bounty. The quiet confidence instilled by their parents began to be overlaid with a sense of royal entitlement. Why wait? Why share? Why tolerate a moment of boredom? Grandma's world had a solution for every want, a cure for every minor discontent. The foundation of home was not just a memory. It was beginning to feel like a faint, outdated rumor from a previous life. Here, in the endless festival of yes, they were not just loved. They were adored, indulged, and sovereign. And they were learning, with every passing day, to wear their new crowns with expectation. The return of the monarchs. 3 weeks passed in a kaleidoscopic blur at the mansion, a seamless stream of days that blended into one long, delicious dream. In the sterile, quiet world of the hospital, however, time moved with the slow, precise tick of a recovery. Kayamika healed, her strength returning day by day under Tun's constant care. Their daily video calls with the children were bursts of chaotic joy that left them feeling both connected and strangely distant. They saw the new hairstyles, the background of opulent new toys, heard the tales of outings that sounded more like royal processions. The parenting they knew, of calm guidance and gentle correction, felt galaxies away. The day of discharge arrived, bringing with it a nervous anticipation. They were going home, but first, they had to retrieve their children from the glittering orbit of Grandma's universe. The drive to Victoria Island was quiet. Tund reached over and took Kayamika's hand. "They'll be happy to see us," he said, as if trying to convince himself. "I know," she replied, her gaze fixed on the approaching gates. "But will they be happy to leave?" The mansion, when they entered, was not its usual temple of hushed grandeur. It echoed with a new, vibrant energy, the shriek of a drone, the tinny melody of a dozen electronic toys, the thunder of 4 pairs of small, expensive sandals on marble. Ibrahim greeted them with a smile that seemed tinged with relief. "They are in the sunroom, sir, ma." They followed the sound. The scene that greeted them in the sun-drenched room was one of dazzling, alien splendor. Gone were the 4 children they had kissed goodbye on their driveway. In their place were 4 little luminaries. Temi and Tonia stood by the grand piano, not in their simple play dresses, but in matching, tiered tulle skirts the color of spun sugar, their hair woven with ribbons and tiny, artificial flowers. They were carefully applying glittery lip balm from bejeweled compacts, their movements practiced and graceful. They looked like confections, beautiful and slightly untouchable. Toby and Teo were in the center of the room, locked in a fierce battle with remote-controlled monster trucks that growled and flashed with real LED headlights. They wore matching miniature bomber jackets over their shirts, and Toby had a new, daring fade cut that made him look years older. Teo's usual thoughtful expression was replaced by one of intense, competitive glee. The room itself was an annex of a toy store. Pristine, abandoned playthings were strewn with casual abandon. A half-eaten, melting sculpture of what looked like a chocolate castle sat on a low table. Chairman the bear, their old sentinel from the nursery, sat forlornly in a corner, overshadowed by the giant stuffed giraffe. For a long moment, Tund and Kayamika stood in the doorway, unseen, their hearts performing a complex dance of joy, love, and sheer disorientation. These were their babies. And yet, they were not. It was Tonia who saw them first. She dropped her lip balm. "Mummy, Daddy." The spell broke. A cacophony of sound erupted as all 4 scrambled towards them. They were engulfed in hugs, the familiar scent of their children buried under layers of new fabric softener, bubblegum shampoo, and sugar. The physical touch was the same, warm and urgent, but everything else was different. "Look at my dress. Grandma bought it." "Daddy, my truck can jump over Teyo's." "Watch. Mummy, your tummy is better? Can you carry me? I have a new bed that's a car. It has real lights." The words tumbled out, a torrent of excitement and acquisition. They were happy to see them, yes, but it was the happiness of subjects showing visiting dignitaries the wonders of their kingdom. As Kayamika knelt, wincing only slightly, to hug them properly, She saw the delicate pearl studs in Temmie's ears. Her ears weren't even pierced. They were clip-ons, but the message was clear. Their little girls had been transformed into young ladies. "You all look incredible," Tun managed, his voice thick with emotion. He ruffled Toby's new haircut, the texture unfamiliar. "Very handsome." Madame Funk appeared then, gliding into the room, her face a picture of serene accomplishment. "You're back. And looking so well, Kayamika." She embraced them both. "As you can see, we have been keeping busy." "That's an understatement, Mama," Tun said, forcing a laugh as Teo demonstrated the roaring engine of his truck at his feet. They spent the next hour being given a grand tour of the children's new lives. They saw the mountain of unopened toys, the wardrobe bursting with clothes that still had tags, the elaborate hair accessories collection. They heard about the private cinema nights, the ice cream for breakfast days, the petting zoo visit. The children's narratives were pure, unadulterated glee. There was no mention of story time, or prayers, or sharing. The lexicon of their old life was absent. Kayamiko watched them, her architect's eye seeing the structure that had been built in their absence. It was dazzling, impressive, and completely at odds with the foundation she and Tund had laid. These were not just spoiled children. They were children who had been given an entirely new kingdom to rule, with a grandmother as their generous, doting patron. As the afternoon sun began to wane, Tund cleared his throat. "Okay, team. Time to pack up. We're going home." The word landed like a stone in a still pond. The jubilant energy vanished. Tonia's lower lip trembled instantly. "Home. But we live here now," Toby stated, not as a question, but as a fact he believed to be self-evident. Temmie's eyes filled with tears. "My carriage bed." Teo simply walked over and clutched Madame Funk's leg, burying his face in her iroh. The parents' happy homecoming had just collided head-on with the reality of the Festival of Yes. Their children, the monarchs of this glittering realm, had no intention of abdicating. The return was not a reunion. It was an attempted deposition, and the young sovereigns were prepared to fight for their throne. The rebellion. The sunroom, so recently a scene of dazzling reunion, froze into a tableau of shock and heartbreak. The cheerful chaos of toys and chatter was replaced by a heavy, disbelieving silence, broken only by Tonia's first, shuddering sob. No, the word was not a plea, but a decree from King Toby. He planted his feet, still clad in his new, expensive sandals, and crossed his arms over his miniature bomber jacket. "We're not going. Grandma said this is our holiday house." Temmie, her tulle skirt rustling, ran not to her mother, but to the pink carriage bed visible through the open door of their wing. She threw her arms around one of its posts. "This is my bed. My real bed." Tund and Kayamika stood, their arms still outstretched from the expected hugs that had dissolved. They felt like strangers, usurpers in this gilded palace their children now called home. Madame Funk, the architect of this paradise, looked stricken. The triumph of her successful reign was curdling into an unforeseen crisis. She tried to summon a soothing tone. Now, my darlings. Mummy and Daddy are all better. Their house has missed you. Their house is boring," Toby shouted, his face flushing with a passion usually reserved for denied cartoons. "There's no koi pond. There's no ice cream machine. We have to go to bed when the sun is still out." Each accusation was a tiny, precise dagger. Kayamika flinched. Their careful routines, their peaceful evenings, the structured love they had nurtured, it was all being reframed as a bleak dictatorship of deprivation. Teo, still attached to his grandmother's leg, simply shook his head, his silent protest the most potent of all. "We have all your old toys waiting," Tund said, his voice strained with a cheerfulness he didn't feel. "Chairman Bear has been very lonely." "Chairman is old," Tonia wailed, as if stating an obvious and pathetic fact. "We have a giraffe that is taller than Daddy." The negotiations had broken down before they began. This was a full-scale rebellion. The children, having tasted absolute sovereignty, were refusing to return to the constitutional monarchy of their parents' home. Tears, real and messy, began to flow. Not the quiet sniffles of a scolding, but the dramatic, gut-wrenching sobs of profound loss. Temmie cried as if her carriage bed were being dismantled before her eyes. Toby's angry defiance melted into heaving cries of injustice. Tonia was a fountain of despair, and Teo's silent tears soaked into Madame Funk's expensive fabric. Kayamika knelt, ignoring the twinge in her healing abdomen. She opened her arms, her own eyes swimming. My babies, please. We've missed you so much. Our home isn't complete without you. Then stay here, Timmy implored, releasing the bedpost to gesture wildly at the opulent room. There's so much room. Grandma has 1,000 rooms. You can have one. The offer, so perfectly logical in a 4-year-old's mind, underscored the vast chasm between the two worlds. They couldn't just visit this paradise. They had begun to belong to it. Madame Funk, witnessing the devastation her love had wrought, was finally shaken from her role as indulgent monarch into that of a guilty grandmother. She disentangled Tayo gently and moved to the center of the storm. Her voice, when she spoke, was low and thick with emotion. My precious ones, listen to me. She sank to her knees, bringing herself to their level, uncaring of her fine clothes on the floor. All of this, is yours. Always. This will always be your holiday palace. The sobbing hiccuped slightly, for wet, reddened faces turned to her, clinging to the lifeline. But your mummy and daddy's house, that is your home. That is your fortress, where they teach you to be strong and smart and kind. You must go back and be their brave princes and princesses there. I don't want to be brave there. I want to be happy here. Toby cried. You can be both, Madame Funk said, her composure cracking. She reached out and cupped his face. I have spoiled you terribly, haven't I? But that is a grandma's special job. Your parents' job is much more important. It is to build you. She looked at each of them. If you stay here forever, eating ice cream and getting new toys, what will you become? It was the first hint of a limit they'd heard in weeks. They stared at her, confused. She pressed on, making a desperate, lavish promise to bridge the impossible gap. Tell you what, you go home with Mummy and Daddy now, like the good, wonderful children I know you are. And this weekend, I will bring you the biggest, most amazing presents you have ever seen. Something for each of you. A peace treaty for going home. Bribery. It was the only currency this new kingdom understood. The sobs subsided into sniffles. The rebellion wavered, its fervor diverted by the promise of further tribute. A present bigger than the giraffe. Tonia whispered. Bigger, Madame Funk vowed. And we can come back to feed the fish? Temmie asked. Every Friday. I promise. Slowly, reluctantly, the little monarchs allowed themselves to be coaxed from their strongholds. They didn't pack their new clothes or their favorite new toys. Those, it was implicitly understood, would remain here, waiting for their return. They were stripped of their royal regalia and redressed in the simple, familiar clothes from their original suitcases, which now felt rough and plain against their skin. The farewell at the mansion's door was a muted, mournful affair. The earlier joyous reunion was a distant memory. They clung to Madame Funk, extracting fresh promises about the weekend's bounty, before allowing themselves to be led, sniffling and heartsore, to their parents' waiting car. As the gates closed behind them, Madame Funk stood alone in the grand foyer. The silence rushed back, but now it was filled with the ghosts of their cries. The victory of the past weeks tasted like ashes. She had filled the silence, only to create a new, more painful kind of quiet, the sound of a paradise lost, and the devastating realization that in building it, she might have made her grandchildren's real home seem like a prison. The rebellion was over, but the war for their hearts, she saw with terrifying clarity, had only just begun. The bitter homecoming. The car journey back across the lagoon was a funeral procession in a luxury SUV. The vibrant, chattering monarchs who had left the mansion were gone, replaced by 4 small, solemn exiles. They stared out the windows, not at the glittering cityscape, but with a hollow gaze that saw nothing. The occasional hiccup or sniffle was the only sound breaking the heavy silence. Tun drove, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Kayamika sat in the passenger seat, staring straight ahead, her hand pressed to her mouth. In the back, the nanny sat helplessly between the car seats, offering soft words that landed on deaf ears. The air was thick with a grief so profound it felt suffocating. When they pulled into the underground garage of their Ikoyi building, the children didn't unbuckle themselves with their usual eager fumbling. They sat, limp and resigned, until the doors were opened for them. The ride in the elevator, which usually prompted a game of pressing buttons, was silent. They trudged down the hallway, their footsteps leaden. The front door swung open onto their home. It was spotless. The nanny had kept it immaculate. The afternoon sun slanted across the polished floors, illuminating the familiar, orderly living room. The wooden blocks were neatly stacked in their basket. The books stood straight on their shelf. Chairman Bear sat in his usual corner, looking forlorn but expectant. Everything was exactly as they had left it. And to the children, it all looked small, dull, and achingly poor. Temmie walked in first, her shoulders slumped. She looked at her simple bunk bed, visible through the open bedroom door, then back down at her own plain sandals. A fresh tear rolled down her cheek. "I want my carriage," she whispered, not as a demand, but as a confession of loss. It was the spark that ignited the silent misery into active anguish. Toby threw himself onto the plush rug, not to play, but to pound his fists against it. "It's boring. It's all boring here," he wailed. Tonya ran to the toy shelf and began pulling books and blocks onto the floor, not to play, but in a gesture of utter rejection. "I hate these. They're stupid." Teo retreated to the furthest corner of the sofa, pulling his knees to his chest, a tiny island of despair. The parents stood paralyzed. This wasn't the joyful reintegration they had visualized during their quiet nights at the hospital. This was a hostile occupation by grieving, displaced persons. Their authority, once naturally woven into the fabric of their daily lives, now felt like an alien imposition. Kayamika moved first, her heart breaking. She approached Tonya, who was now crying amidst the scattered toys. "Sweetheart, please don't throw your things." "They're not my things." Tonya screamed, her face contorted. "My things are at Grandma's. These are old rubbish." The word rubbish hit Kayamika like a physical blow. Every carefully chosen toy, every beloved book, dismissed as trash. She looked at Tund, seeing her own helpless horror reflected in his eyes. They tried to re-establish normalcy. It was time for the evening routine. "Let's pick these up, and then we can have a bath," Tund said, forcing a calm tone. The rebellion reignited. "No bath. I'm not hungry. I want Grandma's bath bubbles that smell like mango." Dinner was a battlefield. The simple, nutritious meal of jollof rice and chicken, a favorite before, was pushed around their plates with disgust. "Grandma's chef makes butterfly-shaped pasta," Temmie said listlessly. The ultimate blow came at bedtime. The structured, calming routine they had built over 4 years, bath, pajamas, 2 stories, prayers, lights out, was met with open warfare. They refused to put on their familiar pajamas, calling them itchy. They demanded 3, 4, 5 stories. When Kayamika gently said it was time for prayers, Toby shouted, "Prayers are boring. Grandma lets us watch a movie until we fall asleep." Finally, exhausted by their own grief and defiance, they cried themselves to sleep. But it was not the peaceful, trusting sleep of before. It was a fitful, unhappy surrender. Tund and Kayamika collapsed onto their own bed, the silence of the apartment now a ringing, painful void. The gentle sounds of 4 sleeping children were replaced by the memory of their sobs. "It's like we've lost them," Kayamika whispered into the dark, a tear tracing into her hairline. "They're here, but they're not ours. They're hers. We have to take it back," Tund said, his voice weary but resolved. "Day by day, we have to take our home back." But the first day had been a rout. The invaders, though small, were entrenched in their longing for a lost kingdom. The foundation they had built felt cracked, its mortar weakened by the potent glue of unlimited ice cream and constant novelty. The bitter homecoming was not just the children's, it was theirs. They had gotten their family whole again, only to find a civil war waiting for them within their own walls. The path back to peace, they realized, would be a long, hard campaign of attrition against the glittering ghosts of Grandma's palace. The clarity of regret. The days that followed were a tense, grinding stalemate. The Ikoyi penthouse, once a haven of predictable rhythms, became a demilitarized zone thick with the fog of discontent. The children performed their daily routines, meals, baths, play, with a listless, perfunctory air. Their spark, the unique light in each of them that Tund and Kayamika had nurtured, seemed dimmed, obscured by a persistent, yearning fog for a place across the lagoon. Every interaction was a comparison. "Grandma lets us have juice in fancy glasses. At Grandma's, we don't have to tidy up before lunch. Grandma's car has a television in the back." The word grandma became a prefix to a paradise lost, a weapon of soft rebellion. The promised biggest presents ever from the weekend visit loomed, a glittering reward for their forced exile, further devaluing the simple pleasures of home. Madame Funk, for her part, was drowning in a different kind of silence. The mansion was not just quiet, it was accusatory. The East Wing stood as a glittering monument to her overreach. She would wander into the grandchildren's palace, now frozen in a state of perfect, playful chaos. The mountain of toys looked not joyful, but like a hoard. The tiny, unworn silk pajamas laid out on the carriage bed seemed like costumes for a play that had closed prematurely. The memory of their tear-stained faces, the feel of Taeyo's desperate grip on her leg, played on a loop in her mind. She had imagined her love as a boundless ocean, but she saw now she had created a riptide, pulling them away from the safe shore of their parents' care. Her weekly Friday lunch, once the highlight of her existence, was a torturous affair. The children arrived not with their former Friday excitement, but with a quiet, strategic politeness. They ate the lavish feast she'd ordered, but their eyes kept darting to the pile of extravagantly wrapped presents in the corner. The joy was transactional. They were collecting on a debt, not sharing in a celebration. After they left, the silence felt heavier, more profound than the original, lonely silence. That old silence had been an empty cup. This new silence was a cup that had been full to overflowing, only to be violently emptied. It was worse. One evening, unable to bear it, she did something she hadn't done in years. She went into Bao's study not to commune with his memory, but to seek his counsel in the empty air. She sat in his chair, the leather cool beneath her. "What have I done, Bao?" Her voice was a raw whisper in the dark room. "I wanted to give them the moon. I only succeeded in making their own sun seem dim." She thought of Kayamika's face at the hospital, pale but determined. She thought of Tun's calm strength as he managed the chaos of 4 babies. She had been so focused on the giving, the toys, the trips, the treats, that she had failed to see what they were already building. A family, not with bricks of money, but with the mortar of consistency, respect, and quiet faith. Her billionaire's mind, so adept at analyzing risk and return, now turned its cold, clear light on her own actions. The ROI, return on indulgence, was catastrophic. She had purchased temporary delight at the cost of lasting peace. She had not strengthened her bond with her grandchildren. She had inserted herself as a rival source of authority, a more fun, more lavish alternative to their parents. The clarity was brutal, humbling. She saw the rift not as the children's ingratitude or her children's strictness, but as a fissure she had engineered. She had built a dazzling, unsustainable world that made the real, sustainable one look like a punishment. The foundation Tund and Kayamika had laid, the prayers, the shared meals, the responsible tidying, the early bedtimes, was not boring. It was the bedrock. Her palace of yes was merely the fancy, unstable topsoil. And in her zeal to make them love her paradise, she had taught them to scorn their foundation. A deep, shuddering regret settled in her bones. It wasn't regret for loving them too much, but for loving them too poorly. For confusing indulgence with love and grandeur with care. She looked at Bao's photograph, his kind eyes seeming to hold a gentle question. "What will you build now, Funk?" The answer came not as a business plan, but as a surrender. She could not undo the spoiling, but she could change its meaning. She could not dismantle the palace she'd built in their hearts, but she could show them it was a summer home, not their permanent address. Her role was not to be the source of their joy, but to be its celebrant. Not the builder of their character, but its proud admirer. The war for their hearts, she realized, didn't require her to win. It required her to lay down her arms. The clarity of her regret showed her the path forward was not in more presents, but in profound respect for her son, for her daughter-in-law, and for the beautiful, sturdy foundation they were trying so hard to protect from the very landslide of love she had unleashed. Mending the weave. The following Friday arrived with a different kind of tension. The children, while still subdued at home, had a glint of anticipation in their eyes, the glint of the promised peace treaty presents. Tund and Kayamika braced themselves for another cycle of spoiling and subsequent crash. When Madame Funk's car arrived, however, it was just her. No driver laden with giant, ribbon boxes. No Ibrahim trailing with bags from exclusive boutiques. She carried only a single, elegant leather tote bag. The children, gathered in the penthouse foyer, scanned her entourage with confusion. "Grandma, where are the presents?" Toby finally asked, his brow furrowed. Madame Funk smiled, but it was a softer, more thoughtful smile than her usual radiant beam. She knelt, setting her bag aside, and opened her arms. "The best presents are right here. Let me look at you." She hugged each child tightly, lingering a moment longer than usual, as if relearning their shape. When she rose, she turned to Tund and Kayamika. "May I come in? I'd like to speak with all of you." They gathered in the living room, the epicenter of so many family times. The children fidgeted, their expectation deflated. Madame Funk sat on the sofa, not assuming her usual place of central command, but as a guest. She pulled 4 small, flat, identically wrapped packages from her bag. Not shiny paper, but simple, beautiful handmade paper tied with twine. "These are for you," she said, handing one to each child. "But before you open them, I need to tell you a story." The children, intrigued by the solemnity, quieted. Tund and Kayamika watched, wary but hopeful. "A long time ago," Madame Funk began, her gaze drifting to Chairman Bear in the corner, "there was a very clever, very busy weaver bird. She could build the most magnificent nest you've ever seen. Big, strong, with a long, beautiful tunnel to keep her babies safe. But one year, she was so excited, she started weaving in pieces of shiny foil and bright plastic she found. The nest sparkled. It was the talk of the whole tree. But when the rains came, the shiny pieces didn't bend with the wind. They didn't soak up the water like good twigs and grass. The beautiful, sparkly nest fell apart." She looked at each of their small, attentive faces. "For the past few weeks, I have been giving you shiny things. So many shiny things. And it was so much fun. But I forgot that your mummy and daddy are the weavers of your real nest. The strong, safe, warm nest that will hold you through all of life's rains. My shiny things are for decoration. Their weaving is for life." She nodded at the packages. "Now open them." The children tore off the paper. Inside each was a simple, beautiful wooden picture frame. And inside each frame was not a photograph, but a proverb, handwritten in Madame Funk's elegant script on parchment. She had them read them aloud. "Temi," in her clear, thoughtful voice, "a tree grown with care bears the sweetest fruit." "Toby," sounding out the words, "the river that forgets its source will soon run dry." Teyo, reading slowly, "A precious bead is polished with patience, not force." Tonia, with a little help, "The cloth is shaped by the hand that weaves it, not by the one who wears it." The room was silent. The children traced the words with their fingers, the meaning seeping in slowly, deeply. These weren't toys to be played with and discarded. They were ideas to be kept. Madame Funk turned to Tund and Kayamika, her eyes glistening. "I have been the one handing out shiny foil. You are the weavers. I am so sorry I made your good, strong weaving seem plain. These," she gestured to the frames, "are to remind them, and me, where the true strength comes from." She then looked back at the children. "My house is your holiday palace. It will always be there for fun, for ice cream, for feeding the koi. But this," she said, her hand sweeping gently to indicate their home, "this is your fortress. This is where you become who you are meant to be. And there is no shiny toy in the world more valuable than that." The change did not happen overnight, but a shift had been placed in the universe. The visit ended not with tears or laden goodbyes, but with calm hugs and a new understanding. The children hung their frames in their bedroom, a quiet counterpoint to the memory of the glittering palace. In the weeks that followed, the mending began. Visits to grandmas were still filled with fun, but they were now framed differently. Madame Funk would ask about their lessons, listen to their prayers before a fancy dinner, and admire a drawing they'd made at home with the same enthusiasm she'd once reserved for a new toy. The bribe stopped. The comparison faded. At home, Tund and Kayamika held the line, but with renewed confidence. The foundation, tested by a tempest of indulgence, had held. Slowly, the spark returned to the children's eyes, not the frantic glitter of constant novelty, but the steady glow of secure, layered love. One evening, during family time, Tonia was drawing a picture. She used a plain gray pencil for the house, strong and square. Then, with a single gold crayon from a small set, she drew a tiny, brilliant sun in the corner. "That's our house," she said, pointing to the gray. "And that," she pointed to the gold sun, "is Grandma's love." It makes our house warm and shiny sometimes, but it lives in the sky. Our house is right here. Tund and Kayamika looked at each other, a profound peace settling between them. The weave, once threatened, was now stronger. It had been mended not by pulling tighter, but by understanding the different strengths of each thread, the strong, sturdy strand of daily love and the brilliant, golden strand of occasional, wondrous joy. Together, they formed a fabric that could finally, beautifully, hold them all. The scene shifts. The soft lighting of the family room is replaced by a warm, studio-like glow. Madame Funk, Tund, Kayamika, and the now teenage quadruplets, Timmy, Toby, Teo, and Tonia, are all sitting together on a comfortable sectional sofa. They are all smiling, relaxed. An unseen camera focuses on them. Tund, smiling warmly at the camera, and that, everyone, is the story of how our family found its balance. Kayamika, nodding, her hand resting on Tund's arm. It wasn't always easy, but it was always worth it. The camera pans to the quadruplets, who are sharing amused, knowing looks. Timmy, laughing softly. I still have that frame, you know. A tree grown with care. It's on my university dorm desk. Toby, grins. The River One is in my room, though I mostly remember the remote control trucks. Tyo, the quiet, thoughtful one, speaks up. It taught us the difference between a holiday and a home. Best lesson ever. Tonia leans forward, her expression bright, and Grandma's Friday lunches are still legendary. Just with slightly more vegetables now. The camera finds Madame Funk, elegant as ever, but her eyes are soft with affection. She is holding Chairman Bear, now a little worn but cherished, in her lap. Madame Funk chuckles, stroking the bear's ear. I learned that being a grandmother isn't about being the source of everything, but about celebrating the wonderful people your children are raising. And occasionally, she winks, still providing the very best ice cream. The family shares a warm, collective laugh. They all lean in a little closer together for a final group shot. Tund, addressing the camera directly. If you enjoyed witnessing a little of our chaos and love. Kayamika, the spoils and the lessons. The quadruplets, in unison, the drama. Madame Funk, with a regal, amused smile. Then do us the kindness. All together, smiling at the camera. Thanks for watching. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories.